How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Hello, America. It's Eric Erickson broadcasting it from Ohio. I've only been up here once before for the Republican convention back in, 2016? Otherwise, have not been. I don't have time to stick around today, though, but I promise I will be back for those of you listening on WHIO. Excited to get back here to Dayton. A beautiful downtown, the Miami River going through downtown. The Dayton Art Institute drove past on the way from the airport. Gorgeous building there. Really neat. I want to go down and have ice cream at that dairy place down by Springfield and check on the Haitians, but don't have time today. Got to drive over to Columbus as soon as I'm done and have a private event. See, I'm not telling you where I'm going or anything like that. I'm trying to do better. Before I take phone calls this hour, and it is an open line Friday, 877-973-7425. But before I do any of that, I actually want to have a real discussion with you on free speech. The New York Times editorial gives rise to this because it really is, for lawyers, you should understand. It's a pet peeve. Now, I'm actually going to give my credentials here because I encountered someone the other night online who had no idea. I was a lawyer for 6 years. I didn't really like practicing law. If I could have just practiced in the areas in which I liked, I'd probably still be a lawyer. Mostly businesses, helping businesses. And some of the businesses I helped were radio, television, newspaper, and colleges. First Amendment law. So one of the things I did was not my major practice, but I did it at the local level in particular. If the local newspaper, TV station were sued for something that happened, I was one of the lawyers that dealt with it. I am very familiar with First Amendment law. So I want to read you part of this editorial at the New York Times, just the opening paragraph. This is the editorial board. A founding principle of the United States, enshrined in the Constitution's opening amendment, is that our republic depends on citizens' freedom to disagree with one another. They need to be able to do so intensely on matters of life and death, including war and divisive modern issues like abortion, gun safety, and health insurance. There are limits to free speech, yes, but they involve edge cases like shouting fire in a theater or inciting an imminent act of violence. If the American ideal of freedom means anything, it is that Americans can engage in an extremely wide range of political speech, including the tasteless and the offensive. There are limits to free speech, yes, but they involve edge cases like shouting fire in a theater. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here as someone who practiced in the area of First Amendment law to tell you that if you hear anyone say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, that person is an idiot who does not know what they are talking about. Because that has never actually been the law of the land in the United States. Oddly enough, the phrase yelling fire in a crowded theater does not even come from a case about someone yelling fire in a crowded theater. It doesn't come from really a major case about major words spoken to incite anything. It comes from the case of United States versus Schenck from the early 1900s. Charles Schenck and Elizabeth Baer were socialists, and they opposed participation In World War I, Congress passed the Espionage Act of 1917, and the law prohibited things like stealing documents related to national security. Think about that. Until the Espionage Act of 1917, we really didn't have a clear law on the books that it was against the law to steal national security and give it to the nation's enemies. That was part of the Espionage Act. But also included was speaking out against military recruiting efforts. In 1917, Woodrow Wilson imposed a draft for World War I, and Schenck and Baer opposed it. They claimed it violated the 13th Amendment, involuntary servitude. The Socialist Party headquarters were raided, and they were charged with violating the Espionage Act, and the Supreme Court unanimously upheld their conviction. Sure did. The Supreme Court of the United States upheld the conviction, ruling that the free speech clause of the First Amendment does not shield advocacy urging conduct deemed unlawful under the Espionage Act. The opinion was written by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Oliver Wendell Holmes used the phrase comparing the leaflets urging people to avoid the draft to yelling fire in a crowded theater. Now, interestingly enough, Holmes would go on to dissent from individuals, from the convictions of individuals under the Espionage Act, Abrams versus United States. And in that case, people were circulating pamphlets criticizing U.S. involvement in the First World War. And it was in that case that Oliver Wendell Holmes filed a dissent that over time became the prevailing opinion on the United States Supreme Court. In that case, he suggested that a wise ordering of society and government actions are better reached by free trade in ideas, that the best test of truth is the power of the thought to get itself accepted in the competition of the market, and that truth is the only ground upon which their wise wishes safely can be carried out. That, at any rate, is the theory of our Constitution. That's his quote. And then, joined by one other justice on the Supreme Court, Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote this: I think that we should be eternally vigilant against attempts to check the expression of opinions that we loathe and believe to be fraught with death, unless they are so imminently threaten immediate interference with the lawful and pressing purposes of the law that an immediate check is required to save the country. In short, unless unpopular speech fits the crying fire in a crowded theater analogy, it ought to be protected. That's what he said in his dissent. Interestingly enough, the Supreme Court overruled all of that over time. And yelling fire in a crowded theater is perfectly permissible. However, there's a catch. If you cause a riot when you yell fire in the crowded theater, you can be liable. If you knowingly intended to provoke a riot, you can be liable. But if you stand up in a crowded theater and you yell fire, fire, and people tell you to shut up and sit down and continue watching the movie, you can't be arrested and prosecuted by the government for yelling fire in the crowded theater. The rule actually has been worked to incitement to imminent lawless action. Incitement to imminent lawless action. That's the boundary for free speech in the United States of America. You are free to stand up and say whatever you want. But if in the heat of passion, you provoke that passion through your words to incite unlawful action, then you can be prosecuted. So, an example off the top of my head. You decide when you see people at a sports match and they have gotten heated, and two guys are in each other's face yelling about their teams, and you provoke them to fight, you can be prosecuted. You've incited imminent lawless action. But if they don't fight, you can't be prosecuted for it. If you stand in the town square and you utter lies about your neighbor, if you stand up and you say, my neighbor Joe, I saw him last night committing bestiality in his backyard with his cow. He keeps his children locked in the basement and he abuses them. I know that he beats his wife regularly. And he invites over the neighbor's wife to have an affair, and they have an OnlyFans account where they produce pornography. I have seen it with my own eyes. Joe has done these things. And it's all made up. You know what? The government cannot prosecute you. Your neighbor Joe can sue you for your last penny. He can take your home and your property. He can take all the money out of your bank account. You can be sued by Joe for defamation because you've lied about him. If you accuse your neighbor of having committed a crime, your neighbor can sue you and will win. If your neighbor is famous and you say a bunch of untrue things about your neighbor by and large has no basis to sue you. But if you accuse your famous neighbor of a crime and say you saw him commit a crime, your neighbor can sue you, even if your neighbor's famous. If you accuse a famous person of committing a felony, that famous person can sue you. If you accuse your famous neighbor of something that is clearly just your opinion, your famous neighbor can't harm you, can't sue you. If your unfamous neighbor can, if you do the same thing to your unfamous neighbor. But if it's a prominent personality, the bar is higher. But it's a lawsuit. It's not a prosecution. The government generally cannot prosecute you in this country for your speech unless your speech is designed to incite imminent lawless action. Only then. You are perfectly allowed to yell fire within a crowded theater, and you better pray that no one runs, because if you provoke a panic, you can be prosecuted for provoking that panic. But it's not about your speech. It's about you knowing there's a high potential of causing a panic that causes injury. It's not about your speech in that case. You can stand on the town square corner. You can say whatever you want to say. But here's the thing as well. The First Amendment protects you from the government. The First Amendment protects you from the government. It doesn't protect Jimmy Kimmel from being fired by ABC, or suspended, rather. It doesn't protect Jimmy Kimmel from having advertisers say they're going to yank their advertising. It doesn't protect Jimmy Kimmel from affiliates saying, we don't want to continue airing the guy. It doesn't protect you from your employer when you get on social media and say Charlie Kirk got what he deserved. Your employer has the right to fire you because your employer has standards they expect employees to meet so that you do not reflect poorly on the company and drag the company into controversy with your words. But that is not a First Amendment issue. That is an employment issue. It is separate from the First Amendment. Your words can have consequence to your job and livelihood, and it's not a First Amendment issue. The First Amendment is only about the United States government. And to the extent that the government is jawboning, that is, inserting themselves into the private affairs of a corporation, yes, you have action against the government. Is Jimmy Kimmel going to have action against Brendan Carr for jawboning, for pressuring ABC to take action? Probably not, because I guarantee you Nexstar and Sinclair will say they were already headed in this direction before Brendan Carr spoke. And if that's the case, he has no claim against Brendan Carr and the FCC for pressuring a private company to take action. And I guarantee you, Nexstar and Sinclair will say that. If you hear the editorialists at the New York Times say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, the Supreme Court has never actually decided that's the law. And in the last 60 years, they've made very clear that's not the law. But what free speech does say, and what the First Amendment means, is that you're protected from government prosecution from your words, but that has nothing to do with what your company does to you. It's only about you and the government, not you and the private sector. Greetings, it's me, it's Eric, 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, happy to have you. It's an open line Friday. We got phones in queue. We've got callers in queue, I guess I should say, although this is a short segment since I spent so much time explaining the First Amendment to everybody. Now you're smarter, though, aren't you? You will never again say you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You'll look judgmentally at those who do. When we come back, I will take your phone calls. I promise. Out of the gate, I'll take your phone calls. Also, I have agreed to be, speaking of callers, to be on C-SPAN on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. dealing with C-SPAN callers. My longtime friend, Sam Feist, who used to be my boss at CNN, is now the president of C-SPAN and has asked me a couple of times now to do that in the mornings on Sunday. I got to get up for church anyway, so figure it'll guarantee I get to church by going on in C-SPAN and hanging out with the host, talking about the Jimmy Kimmel thing in particular, Charlie Kirk as well, and then some of the president's foreign policy issues we'll be talking about Sunday morning. So if you happen to be up and want to turn on C-SPAN, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, I will be there with the insane C-SPAN callers. They are notorious, the C-SPAN callers, because they're not actually vetted. You basically you get on and you call a line, a Democrat line, a Republican line, an independent line, and they queue you up, and off you go. And call screening at C-SPAN is the most insane job on planet Earth. All right, let me tell you about Old Glory Bank, because Old Glory Bank would love to be your bank. They're my bank. OldGloryBank.com/Eric is where you can go to get an account. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Old Glory Bank was started by conservatives. It is a bank for conservatives and everyone else who loves the free market, who is worried about debanking trends. You'll get protected by Old Glory Bank. All you do is go to OldGloryBank.com/Eric. You get your account. If you're a veteran, they've got great deals for you, including no fees for their premium accounts. Businesses get great business checking accounts. They're very hands-on with businesses. You can do mortgages, you can do CDs, you can do car loans, you can do so much at oldglorybank.com/Eric. oldglorybank.com/ERICK. Just go find out about them from them at oldglorybank.com/Eric. They are committed to small businesses and freedom. They would rather your rights be protected than their interest. They're just a great bank. I've enjoyed using them. I've got a no-fee checking and a no-fee savings account. You can too. You can also get that business account. oldglorybank.com/Eric. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply. Hello, my friends. It is Eric Erickson here as promised. It's an open line Friday. Time to go talk to some of you around the country. 877-973-7425. Although, to be fair, I've talked so long, a whole lot of people hung up. But Adam has not hung up, waiting patiently for me. How are you, sir? How are you?
Good. How's it going, Eric?
Great.
Hey,
What's going on?
With the news of the Russian MiGs violating Estonian airspace, I want to get your thoughts on whether you think this is part of a larger plan between the Russians and the Chinese to basically wait out Trump's administration and maybe see if they could take Taiwan after he leaves office. I think it's one of my bigger complaints. I feel like Trump's a little bit naive on this whole issue.
You know, he does not want war. Trump doesn't. He is his first term. He's very proud of the fact that he never sent troops off to war. And I do think he thought with the force of his personality, he could convince Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping to stand down from Ukraine, from Taiwan, and they're not willing to because they've started collaborating more and more together. I actually, you talk to members of the military, they feel very certain that by 2027, that's the date they all cite for the invasion of Taiwan, that it's going to take the Chinese that long. The Chinese themselves have suggested by 27 they'll take action. I think Putin himself is trying to test how far he can push Trump before Trump takes some actions. The entire Russian economy right now, I don't know that people realize this, has been geared towards war now. It would actually be more economically costly at this moment, key phrase there, at this moment, it would be economically more costly for the Russians to stop their war than it would to prolong the war, because their entire economy now is on a war footing. So where does that actually go? Well, the way to make it more costly for Russia to prolong the war than stop it is to get the European Union, as Trump is trying to do, to stop buying Russian oil and gas. It is an absurd statistic, but it's true, that the European Union buys more oil from Russia than they give money to Ukraine for weapons. They are funding the Russian war effort, and they can't stop. They're addicted to it. This provocation, for those of you who haven't heard, the Russians flew fighter jets very close to the one of the Baltic capitals, I think Estonia. You've got three: Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And they are very pro-free market. They are very pro-West. They are very big fans of the United States. And the Russians continue this provocation. They're poking at the fence like the velociraptors did in Jurassic Park. They're poking at the fence to see if there's electricity still on. They're trying to see what are the NATO defenses. How does NATO respond to these things? NATO has now shot down a couple of drones that have drifted into Polish airspace, among other things. We are watching the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, and the North Koreans build a new Eastern Axis. They are beginning to collaborate together more and more, and they become more dangerous as they collaborate. I've said this before. It is worth saying again. I talked to a former general in the Marine Corps who was very high up, who pays attention to this at a national security level, and he pointed out that one of the hardest things to do among new allies is learn how to learn from each other. One of the reasons the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians have been somewhat dysfunctional together is because they didn't know how to learn from each other. They're beginning to learn how to learn from each other. The Russians are now teaching the Chinese Russian submarine tactics to combat the Americans. The North Koreans are teaching the Iranians how to build high-tech drones. The Iranians are teaching the Chinese and the Russians subversive skills in the Middle East. The Chinese are providing technology. The Russians are providing oil. They're beginning to collaborate with each other as an alliance of a kind. And that's dangerous for us. And I do think that President Trump has thought that through the force of personality, he can bring the Russians out of that. In fact, there is prominent thinking among some of the people around Donald Trump that the Russians really don't like the Chinese, so maybe they can be brought to the West. I will tell you, it's one of the things that I, for the longest time, believed, and I've changed my mind on. See, for a very long time, there were a lot of us on the right and on the left who believed that the Russians, the Soviet Union gone, the Russians could actually, historically, the bulk of the population is European, not Asian. Asia's divided through the Ural Mountains there. Most of the population of Russia is to the west of the Ural Mountains. St. Petersburg, Moscow, the like, that's the population hub. They used to be very, very pro-West. A lot of them grew up speaking French because the Tsarist Russians were very pro-French. We should be able to bring them to the West. That was the thinking. But actually, over time, it became very clear the Russians believe that they themselves are a dominant power. They're actually a third world country, if we're honest about it. The Russians are a pretty third world country. They're developing. They're not a developed economy. But they think of themselves as a superpower because the Soviet Union was. Tsarist Russia thought of itself as dominant. Catherine the Great, Peter the Great, when he was Tsar, believed very heavily in working with the Europeans. Catherine the Great decided to assert Russian dominance in a Russian sphere of influence, invaded and took over Crimea from the Ottoman Empire, wanted to show the world that the Russians were unique. She abandoned speaking European languages, German and French, and embraced the Russian language and the Russian people and Russian culture, even though she wasn't Russian, and really helped establish the Russian identity as distinct from the Europeans and Asians. It was a very distinctive culture, and that is embedded within the culture of Russia today. They do not want to be a Western power. They want to be an independent power. So Russian jets performed a low pass over a Russian oil platform in the Baltic Sea, violating a safety zone a short time ago. This morning, they flew within 7 miles of the Estonian capital. They're clearly putting pressure on NATO and the European allies to see exactly how we will respond. Essentially, what they're trying to do is provoke us to fire the first shot. Things are heating up greatly there with Russian provocation. Now, interestingly enough, the Russians also don't like the Chinese. Just as the Russians have a history going back to Catherine the Great of wanting to assert their dominance and independence from Europe and be their own thing, they also have a history during the Soviet era of skirmishes with the Chinese along the Chinese border, and they believe themselves to be the dominant race of people, and it is an ethnic racial issue. The Chinese believe themselves to be dominant to the Russians. They don't actually have a natural fit together. They don't actually have a natural alliance. It's an alliance that exists to combat the American-led world order. But there are tensions within that relationship that we can exploit over time. I do think the president, though, at this point needs to realize the U.S. needs to lead. What a lot of the thinking within the Trump administration has been is that we don't have the money or the resources to do it anymore. So let's do what Great Britain did as its empire started to crumble. We play all sides. We have a sphere of influence that is the Western Hemisphere. We build up our resources in the Western Hemisphere, protect ourselves, and then play off of everybody else. The problem is that begins to collapse the Western world order, and we've gotten so much financial benefit from the Western world order, it actually puts us in financial risk to have the collapse of the Western world order. Why? Because currency is exchanged in dollars. All financial transactions are transacted through an American banking system. U.S. trade gets better deals and better interest rates than everyone else in the world because we lead the world order. All that goes away if this becomes a much more multilateral world than an American-led Western world order. It actually does drive up your costs. To the extent there are people who fantasize about an isolationist America and a retreat from the world stage, they have the benefit of everyone in the country not understanding what it was like before the United States led the world. The oldest Americans fought in World War II, where at that time we were beginning to assert our dominance. There is not really an American alive today who understands what the world was like before American dominance. So those who want to retreat from the world can play to a hypothetical that pretends we still get the luxuries of the world at the cost we're getting them, which isn't actually so. If you understand anything about economics, we have to lead the world to get the benefits we're getting. And the Russians and the Chinese together want to end that American dominance. Trevor, you're going to be the next caller today on the Eric Erickson Show. How are you?
Hey, Eric. It's Trevor. Thank you for letting me be on the call. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Hey, I just, I was telling your screener that I think this is purely a business decision by ABC that the primary viewers that they're looking for is 18 to 49. And Kimmel's ratings, just a quick bit of research, Kimmel's ratings have gone down 25% in that demographic, right? Trump, his polling leading up to the election went up 10 to 15% over Biden 4 years earlier in that same group. I think that ABC realizes that demographic is tired of being called a fascist, tired of being blamed for so many things, and they just made a phone call. I think it's that simple.
Oh, look, I mean, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the advertisers were calling before Brendan Carr at the FCC said anything. And it's notable. And, to your point, so being in this media business now, the 18 to 47, 45-year-old demographic or so, the young people, the advertisers love them. The sweet spot for advertisers is 25 to 54. And in the 25 to 54 market, Kimmel's ratings are down over 40% since the beginning of the year. And a business can't evaluate the value of ads at a reasonable rate when you're spending $40-50 million a year on Kimmel's program. Your local advertisers are struggling to sell local advertising during that block, both because of terms and ratings and audience alienation. Your national show is now struggling to have good value for the advertising because your ratings are down so much in the key advertiser demo. Yeah, I mean, Kimmel brought this on himself. That's why I agree with Ted Cruz's statement that it looks bad what Brendan Carr did, but also Brendan Carr should have said nothing and this still would have happened. But because he said something, the left gets to avoid it, make themselves look like the victim here and say it was the Trump administration. It was Trump administration. No, it wasn't. It was Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel blew up his own ratings. Jimmy Kimmel decided to turn his program into a left-wing mouthpiece, a progressive propaganda hour that used Democratic talking points to shape his show. He had on Democratic politicians, Democratic candidates, Democratic causes. The Republicans and conservatives and Christians were the butt of all of his jokes. He did it to himself. It's the same situation with Stephen Colbert. They've stopped complaining and trying to blame the Trump administration for that because even the people within CBS who hated Donald Trump came out and said this had nothing to do with Trump. We were losing money on the program. And Colbert couldn't cut back costs enough to keep the show going. Same thing with Jimmy Kimmel. It was only a matter of time. Now, my hope is that neither CBS nor ABC abandon the late night product. I don't think they should. What I think they should try to do is find a host who is more open to skewing both sides. I don't mind jokes about the right. I think Trump is the great punchline for a lot of jokes. But so, too, are the Democrats. So, too, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And also, there's a lot of non-political humor out there you can talk about on late night. Bring in a Shane Gillis. Bring in a Joe Rogan. Replace Jimmy Kimmel with his friend Adam Carolla. Find someone who can relate to more Americans than what Jimmy Kimmel could relate to. Kimmel stopped relating to the country. The man who used to put large-breasted women on trampolines and guzzle beer on TV decided to become a woke progressive, humorless scold whose entire staff was so progressive, he did one bit one time on the text messages his staff did about how hot Luigi Mangione was, and they wanted to be on the jury so they could find him not guilty of killing the insurance CEO. That's his whole staff was hyper-progressive. Led him down this rabbit hole, and it cost him his job. Brendan Carr had nothing to do with it, but because he spoke, it allows the left to claim that he did, which gives them the opportunity to not have to account for what the Kimmel Show became. Hello there. It is Eric Erickson here, coming to you from Dayton, Ohio. The phone number is 877-973-7425 as I continue meeting my different affiliates out there, traveling around the country. I promise those of you in listening on WHIO, I'll get back for an event. I got invited to do an event, private event over in Columbus with some of the political leaders and others. No details to be announced. And said, sure, I can come up. I haven't been up to WHIO, hadn't been to Dayton before, wanted to see it. So flew in, get to see it, do my show, hop in the car, drive the hour or so over to where I'm going for the evening, and should be a great event. And But that means I don't have time to go down to see the ice cream dairy place that I wanted to go to, or go to Springfield and see the Haitians or anything like that. So I promise, I will come back. We do have other news to get to, although I'm continuing to watch the situation with the Russian fighter jets in the Baltic now. They have now done a low, close pass over the capital of Estonia and a very low pass over a Polish oil rig in the North Sea. Inside a safety zone they're not supposed to get into. The Russian pilots are having a moment today, intimidating the Europeans, seeing if they can provoke the Europeans. So keeping my eye on that. Also, what's happening in Nepal, too, and what's happening with CBS. There is an absolutely, you think the Kimmel stuff is bad. It's starting to dawn on journalists that CBS News is about to be in upheaval as Bari Weiss exerts editorial control. They're really not happy about the fact that the progressive control of CBS News and potentially now CNN is going away. In fact, a lot of CNN employees, I can guess who some of them are beginning to badmouth Paramount as it looks to buy the media properties of Warner Brothers, including CNN. Going to be very interesting to see how this continues to develop. When we come back, I'll take more of your phone calls as well. 877-973-7425. Don't forget, text ERICK, ERICK, to 33777. Subscribe to the show notes, the podcast, and the like. Right now, I got to tell you about Americans for Prosperity, because they are the largest leading grassroots group in the country. They happen to be conservative, and right now they would love for you to join them at AFPvolunteer.com. But what they really want is for all of us to commit to taking a step for freedom. They're trying to get 250,000 steps for freedom. It's a challenge they've got going on right now, where they want 250,000 Americans to take one step for freedom in their own community, your community, my community, one step for freedom. 250,000 of us do it, recommit ourselves to the founder's vision of the country. We will have meaningfully improved the country. All you have to do is go to AFPvolunteer.com to sign up and find out more. You can get involved with the organization as well. They advance common sense conservative reforms around the country at the local, state, and federal level. They get you involved and plugged into a community of like-minded conservatives to talk to your local government, your city council, your state legislature, even Congress, about advancing great legislation like school choice, deregulation for small businesses, and more. Go to AFPvolunteer.com today and sign up.